So when I heard the cell phone go off a little bit earlier today, it reminded me of a time when before I came to the auto estate and I was still consulting. I was probably, a year, maybe 2 years into my career. So I was pretty young, fresh out of college. And I had just got a new phone. I was really excited. I don't know, it was like the iPhone 4, the iPhone 5, whatever the new phone was back then. I thought it was the neatest thing ever. And I'm sitting in a meeting that one of the partners at my old firm took me to. So I felt really big and cool because I got to travel to a county and go to a meeting where we got to talk about all kinds of really interesting TIF stuff, which I'm sure everyone here thinks is a very, very exciting things. Well, we're in the middle of the meeting, probably 15 minutes in, and my phone goes off. I had set up an alarm on the phone, and it starts going off and going off and going off. I see the partner look at me with this face that I'll never forget. Well, I finally get the thing to turn off. 5 minutes later, it goes off again. So I'm no longer happy that I'm at this meeting. I'm more thinking I wish I didn't come. So I run out of the room, turn my phone off, and go back. Luckily, partner's not really known for being understanding for things like this. Luckily, in the car, he was laughing about because the meeting went well. We got a new client. We got some new work for the firm. So he was in a very good mood and very understanding. But to this day, every meeting, I actually had it on today, but usually I always turn my phone off because of that. It's just funny that made me think of that. So anyways, I'll transition now back into the boring stuff that nobody really isn't quite as exciting to hear about. I just wanted to I wanted to have a quick a conversation on excise taxes. A lot of you, if you were at the regional conferences a little bit earlier, when was that? In September or August, whenever that was. I did the presentation on motor vehicle taxes, the highway taxes, local road and streets, the local income tax, where I kind of just looked at the statute and talked about the statute and how kind of the flow of the funds works. I kind of wanted to do a similar conversation with the excise taxes. So a lot of my conversation here is going to be me reading the code that I wrote down. So I apologize ahead of time. I know it could be a little dry, but I don't want to paraphrase too much because that's when I misspeak. The other thing I want to talk about is some settlement items with excise taxes and how they kind of relate and go together. So the first thing I have here is a funny meme of George Bush. Something wrong with his banana. I don't know if I'm sure a lot of you met Courtney Everett, who is the deputy auditor for finance and reporting in our office. When I put this slideshow together, she loves George Bush, and now that is her wallpaper on your screen. She thinks it's the funniest thing ever. So that gets us to the slides. So the first thing we're going to talk about are types of excise taxes. During settlement time, when you hear excise taxes, this is referring to motor vehicle excise tax, aircraft excise tax, auto rental excise tax, boat excise tax on recreational vehicles and truck campers, and heavy equipment rental excise tax. The heavy equipment is actually a new excise tax that's going to be beginning the first of this year. It came out of the last legislation. So the motor vehicle excise tax is from Indiana Code 6-6-5. One thing you'll notice on a lot of my slideshows is that on all these slideshows, since I'm pulling the information straight from statute, I made sure to reference where I'm pulling it from in statute. So if you ever want to go back and find some more detail and some more points from what I'm just pulling, this is an easy way to go back and find the information. So motor vehicle excise taxes are imposed instead of ad valorem property tax levied on state and local levied for state or local purposes. So that's basically just saying for your car, your personal vehicle, you don't pay property tax on it, so you pay a motor vehicle excise tax. It's also in addition to any registration fees imposed under IC 918.1 on the vehicle. The vehicle excise tax is imposed on the following. It's imposed on all passenger motor vehicles, so the cars we drove here on today, motorcycles, motor drive cycles, trailer vehicles with a declared gross weight of 9,000 pounds or less, trucks with declared gross weight of 11,000 pounds or less, mini trucks, and military trucks. Statute determines this tax as assessed on vehicles based on age, class, or vehicle. If you would go to look in the statute, there's actually a whole section in the statute that breaks down a whole schedule that says that if your car is this old and it is in this class, this is the amount of tax that you're going to pay. Taxpayers can receive credits on certain vehicles. It's under the U.S. Veterans or rental vehicles. Excise taxes may be collected by the BMV at licensed branches, full service providers, and partial service providers. Basically, that's just saying when you go pay your annual registration every year, when you go buy your new plates, that's when you pay the excise tax. Collections must be reported at the county auditor on at least a weekly basis. So this next slide, what I do is I kind of talk about between the county treasurers and the county auditors and just the different obligations that both offices have. And this is all found under IC 6-6-5-10. Janie, how am I doing? Am I talking too fast? Thank you. So the county treasurer, upon receiving the excise tax collections, shall receipt such collections into a separate account for settlement at the same time as property taxes are accounted for and settled in June and December for each year. It's a lot of language just to say that the funds are received by the treasurers, put into their own account, and settled twice a year. The treasurer and the auditor, the treasurer and auditor have the right and duty to make advances prior to the time of final settlement in the same manner as property taxes provided by IC 513-6-3. So, as many of you may know, you may make advances on these taxes. County auditor obligations determine the total amount of excise taxes for each taxing district and distribute funds in the same manner as property taxes, and determine and remit to the state welfare and tuition support allocation to the treasurer of the state at settlement time. So that's one of the funds where we say that in order to get your final approval, we have to receive all these excise taxes. So the other item for the motor vehicle excise tax is the motor vehicle excise tax replacement, which is IC 6-6-5-9.5. This is commonly known as the excise lottery credit. So the excise lottery credit, the credit reduces the total tax liability for certain vehicles. Source for the funding of the credit comes from the lottery tax. I don't know about you guys, I just played the lottery, didn't win. That's why I'm here. 1.6 billion didn't come to me. Hoping for 600 today. The total amount of the monthly credit is the lesser of $19,701,344 or the actual credit received. I did some research and I looked to see how often it isn't that 19.7 million. I looked back 4 or 5 years and I couldn't find a single time it hasn't. Can you think of any time, Janie?
A long time ago, when I first started with the state, usually in November and December, but that was when they had a different schedule for when we all had to get our plates renewed. And it seemed like because it was set up alphabetically, that you don't have a lot of people whose last names start with XYZ. So typically November and December, almost always December was less. But yeah, we haven't had that in years.
She did a good job there. She didn't know I was going to ask her that question. Keeping her on her toes. But so it's almost always that 19.7. Distributions of the credit must occur prior to the 25th day of each month. And then here, I say in December, but it's really the January distributions, the December revenues of each year. A true-up occurs to ensure that each county receive the correct proportional share of the credit based on the total annual amount of the credit. What this is saying is that on a monthly basis, we calculate the amount based on the prior month revenues. Then when we do our final distribution for the year, we look at what it would have been for the total month for each county and then adjust or true up the distribution based on the total to make sure everyone received the correct 12-month total. So the steps for our distributions the first step is that the BMV determines the amount of excise tax credit that would have been collected for each county based on the 1/1/1995 rate schedule. So the tax that is distributed, or the lottery tax, it's the difference between the actual credit from the prior month less the January 1st, 1995, what they would have been at that schedule. Then once the BMV comes up with that lottery credit amount, the AOS determines a monthly uniform distribution percentage to be applied in determining the amount of motor vehicle excise tax replacement money to be dispersed to each county. So we come up with this factor, and then we multiply for each county what their credit amount is times this factor. And this factor is based on the allocation of the 19.7 million I was talking about in the last slide. And then AOS distributes to the county the amount of the difference determined in step 2 in the month of the Bureau's report for the county, multiplied by the monthly uniform distribution percentage, which I was just talking about. So is that how everybody feels right now? Nothing like having statute read to you, right? Especially when we're talking about annual distribution percentages and lottery credit amounts, and I know it's exciting stuff. I like this one because I assume that's Bob Dominion. I don't know if it is for sure, but I'm holding a sign saying I'm bored. It's not. I don't know. Anyways, aircraft excise tax. Aircraft excise tax is under IC 6-6.5, and it's much like the motor vehicle excise tax. It's imposed on taxable aircrafts instead of property taxes levied for state and local purposes, and it's also in addition to any registration fees imposed. Statute determines tax imposed vehicles based on age and class of aircraft. So just like for motor vehicles, there's a little chart that's in statute that everyone follows when you come up with your taxable amount. The payment of the tax. The tax is collected and administered by DOR, or the Department of Revenue. It's paid annually by the owner of the aircraft, and penalties can be imposed for failure to register aircraft for pay taxes greater of $20 or 20% outstanding of tax. Oh, thanks. She has my notes. Allocation and distribution of tax. Tax is allocated to the county in which the aircraft is usually located and not in operation. I thought that was kind of interesting. I never really thought about it. An airplane kind of goes all over the place, all over the country, over the state, or the world. So I never thought about the fact of how it's where it's parked, and that's where the tax is determined. The Department of Revenue distributes to each county treasurer on a quarterly basis, the Department of Revenue distributes to each county treasurer on a quarterly basis. The distribution of the tax, it occurs by the 15th of that quarterly month, and the county auditor and treasurer receives a quarterly aircraft excise report for each distribution, and that's all from the Department of Revenue. The county treasurer obligations, that can be found under Indiana Code 6-6-6-6.5-21. That's a tongue twister. Deposit money received in a separate fund known as Aircraft Excise Tax Fund. So when the funds sent to the county treasurer, they set up their own fund, and that's where these excise tax funds must be deposited. And then within 30 days of receiving taxes from DOR, they must file a report with the county auditor concerning the aircraft taxes collected. Then they make settlement with county auditor concerning taxes to be distributed. So then the county auditor allocates the money in the aircraft excise fund to the taxing units in the county. Funds are allocated to the taxing district where the excise tax were collected. So wherever that airplane was parked, those taxing districts at that locations are who receive that distribution. The auditor also determines and remits to the state the welfare and tuition support allocation to the treasurer of state at the semi-annual settlements. All right, next one. auto rental excise tax. That's Indiana Code 6-6-9. Tax imposed on rental passenger motor vehicles and trucks. One thing to remember is that in order to impose this excise tax, the vehicle has to be rented for periods of 30 days or less. And the fee or the excise tax imposed is 4% of gross retail income received by retail merchants. Exemptions to this rule are trucks with weight over 11,000 pounds, and I thought this one was kind of different, funeral home directors who is using rental as part of funeral. Person renting vehicle is liable to pay tax. Merchants just collect the tax and report it to the state. So as you would think, if I'm going to Hertz right now this afternoon to rent a car to drive around Switzerland County, I actually pay the tax. The Hertz just collects the tax from me, and then they report it to the state. And by reporting it to the state, they report it to the Department of Revenue. So at the time, I thought it was good to set up all these animations, or slowly come in, but that keeps getting me behind. So now I'm trying to undo it. Collection of revenues. Revenues are deposited into separate account of the state general fund. So as you remit your tax return with all the funds, so let's say Hertz submits their revenue, the DOR receives it and then puts the money into the state general fund. The funds are distributed to county treasurers on or before May 20th and November 20th. These distributions occur by the Department of Revenue. Amounts distributed to county treasurers equals the amount of taxes collected by their county. So just like the aircraft fee we were talking about earlier, the amounts that you're going to receive are only all the rental excise taxes that occurred in your county. You're not, if you're Switzerland County, you're not going to receive all the rental fees that happened in one of your neighboring counties. It's only from your county. They stay local. The DOR must notify the auditor the amount that was distributed to the county treasurer, and then at the time of each distribution is made to a county treasurer, the Department of Revenue must certify to the county auditor each taxing district in the county where the auditor rental excise taxes were located. So here are some of the obligations yet again. You're going to start noticing that for a lot of the excise taxes, the obligations are very similar, but for the purpose of really looking at these, I decided to say it every time. So for the rental excise tax, the county treasurer's obligations are to deposit such collections into a separate account for settlement at the same time as property taxes are accounted for and settled in June and December of each year. So they receive the money, they set it into their own account. The funds are settled each year in June and December. The treasurer and auditor have the right and duty to make advances prior to the time of final settlement in the same manner as property taxes. County auditor obligations to determine the total amount of excise taxes for each taxing district and distribute funds in the same manner as property taxes at settlement. So this moves us to the next category, which is boat excise taxes. Boats that are subject to the boat excise tax for a boating year are not subject to taxation under 6-1.1 for ad valorem property taxes. Statute determines taxes imposed on the vehicles based on age and class of the boat, just like the other taxes where we're talking about vehicles or aircrafts are a tax. There is a chart that it goes by based on the same kind of circumstances. Excise tax is paid to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. So unlike some of the other fees that we're talking about that goes to the DOR, these go to the BMV, and the excise tax is paid at the same time as the registration fees. And the BMV must report collections to the county auditor on at least a weekly basis. So here's a list of a lot of the boats that are actually exempt from the boat excise tax. I'm not going to read through every one of them, but you'll notice that there's kind of a common theme coming on here where it's usually, if it's of government, they don't have to pay the tax. The one I thought was enjoyable was the human-powered vessel. I actually Googled to verify what that is, and that is like a rowboat. That's what I thought, rowboat, kayak, but I just wanted to make sure that my assumption was correct. I learned a long time ago that don't assume. I'm wrong a lot. And the other thing, it kind of sets stipulations, too, that the boat has to be in the state for a certain amount of time. Here they're using the 22 days. So that's just saying that if you store the boat here a couple days, that you don't have to pay the tax. More on boat excise tax. So here's the obligation slide. So much like all the other excise taxes, deposits of the collections are deposited into you can guess it, the boat excise fund. At the time of settlement, the treasurer must file a report with the county auditor concerning the prior 6 months of boat excise taxes were received. And then they have to make a settlement with the county auditor for the boat excise taxes received. And then maintain records concerning the boat excise taxes received. Lots of received there. County auditor obligations. Determine the total amount of the boat excise fund for taxing district and distribution of funds in the same manner of property taxes. And then determine and remit to the state welfare and tuition support allocations to the treasurer of the state for semi-annual distribution. You're noticing a theme here. It's kind of seems the same process. It's money goes to the treasurer, they set up an account, make settlement with the county auditor, then the auditor distributes to the units, and then also the auditor distributes to the state. So this goes to the excise on recreational vehicles and truck campers. This is under IC 6-6-5.1. This tax is imposed instead of the ad valorem property taxes as well, and it's also in addition to the fees imposed on the vehicles. The excise tax is imposed on the following. This is pretty straightforward. It's the recreational vehicles and truck campers. The name did a really good job at naming that for us. The statute determines the tax assessed based on the vehicles based on age, class of vehicle, and class of vehicle. Class is determined by the cost of the vehicle. Excise taxes are collected by the BMV at licensed branches, licensed branches or their full service providers, and at their partial service providers. The BMV must report collections to the county auditor on at least a weekly basis. Excise taxes collected by DOR are deposited, that should be excise taxes collected by the BMV are deposited into the state general fund, and taxes are credited to the appropriate county for the reported by the BMV by the first working day of the following week collection. So here's the kind of the obligations slide. Much like we were talking about earlier, the county treasurer receipts the collections into a separate account for settlement at the same time as property taxes are accounted for at June and December settlement. At least the legislation was consistent on the wording for that. Makes it easier for us to follow. The treasurer and auditor have the right and duty to make advances prior to the time of the final settlement. And then the county auditor obligations are to determine the total amount of excise taxes for each taxing district and distribute funds in the same manner as property taxes. And then prior to August 1st of each year, they must furnish the proper officer of each political subdivision an estimate of the money to be distributed in the next county year. So this next one that we're going to go into, the heavy equipment rental excise tax, this was actually new from our prior legislation period this last spring. This is a tax imposed on rental of heavy equipment from a retail merchant. Rented for periods of less than 365 days, so it's only on heavy equipment that was rented for under a year. And the total gross tax is 2.25% of gross retail income received by the retail merchant. Some of the exemptions to the tax are federal, state, and local governments. The person renting the equipment is liable to pay the tax, but much like the auto rental that we were talking about earlier, the merchant, whoever rented the vehicle, collects the tax and reports it to the state. The collection of revenues, as we were talking about in the last slide, they are remitted to the state by the merchant who rented the vehicle in the same manner as they pay sales tax. So they remit it to the Department of Revenue. And then due on or before April 30th and October 30th of each year, the amount distributed to the county treasurer equals the amount of tax collected by their county. So that's just important to remember, that the amount that you're going to receive is only the rental excise tax that occurred in your county. You're not going to receive anything that from your neighboring counties or so forth. And then at the time of each distribution is made to a county treasurer, the Department of Revenue must certify to the county auditor each taxing district in the county where the taxes were collected. So here is the obligation slide, and deposits for the treasurer, they have to deposit such collections into a separate account for settlement at the same time as property taxes are counted for June and December of each year. And then the county auditor obligations determine the amount of excise taxes for each taxing district, distributed funds in the same manner of property taxes. Oh, that was a lot of excise taxes and a lot of reading of statute. And so before I move on, I just want to take a few seconds to see if there were any questions, because that was a lot of information. It looks like there is a question. We got a microphone coming around.
Thank you. Okay. We were just discussing amongst ourselves the RV excise tax, the recreational vehicle. Does that come in as its own labeled excise like boat and aircraft? Because if it's supposed to, it doesn't. Or does that come in as part of your auto excise? Because I know several people in Owen County that own RVs pay that tax, but that's not coming back to Owen County unless it's part of your calculation for auto excise.
From the way I read in the statute, it sounds like it should come in as its own separate tax, but it sounds like if it's not, I can check with the Department of Revenue, because they're the ones who are distributing it to you, and I can check with them and see how they are sending that to you, just to make sure that you know how it's coming in. Yeah, okay, that's a good idea. I was just trying to figure out a good way to send the question to us. Yeah, send us an email to the local government email, and we'll get back to you on that. That's a great question.
Yeah, my question is concerning the heavy equipment. It's going to they're going to pay the rental fee, the tax on the rental fee, to the rental organization, and they'll remit that through Indiana tax, and it will come back to us. So the question that I have is this: since it won't go through BMV, it's going to be like a different kind of tax altogether. We just went through the same thing with the food and beverage tax that we imposed, and the people who signed up didn't realize you have to sign up through InBiz before you can pay it on Indiana in tax. And so my question is, the auditors, we have never received a list of things that are going to be taxed with that new tax. For instance, obviously, if you have a big front-end loader or something huge that sits on a truck that gets taken out to a job site, we can all figure out, yeah, that's going to be part of it. But what about the small things, like at the rental companies that are local? Because I don't think they know really what the threshold is or something. So what I was wondering is if maybe somebody could email out to every auditor the list of what we're supposed to be taxing and what we're not supposed to be taxing. So when they call and ask questions, because you know how people are, they won't call until it's right time to pay that tax, and then they'll freak out, that we'll have like something to be able to email them.
That's absolutely a great point and question. I think that's something our office can put together, and we can send out in a memo just to everyone, so you know, yeah, exactly what should be being taxed, what shouldn't be taxed. Yeah, we can absolutely do that. Write that down. 2 questions, 2 follow-ups. 0 for 2.
Bob, I've got a question that Amber wanted me to ask you. Will the Form 22s ever be available to the public online on Gateway?
They are.
Since when?
Oh, they were back when I was before I even came to the state, we were able to pull them online. Now, TIFs, I know we're not. And I don't know if that's been updated or changed. But if you go to, I can even show you. It's kind of hidden. It took me some time to find it once. But yeah, so if anyone contacts you, you can tell them to go to Gateway. Let's see if I can remember this. I haven't done this for a while. Once you get into Gateway, it's under the budget application. And then if you scroll down on the budget application, it says distribution form 22s. Just the one thing to know, it does not have TIF form 22. So if someone's trying to find TIF distributions, they still have to contact you guys. Yes, I answered one.
Next question is, why can't the BMV do their own boat refunds? Instead of having to do the paperwork, bring it up to us, we have to cut the check, we have to reduce, the payments. It just seems like it's a waste of time. They can do other refunds. Why can't they do boat refunds?
So, yeah, why don't you answer that?
I don't know if I'm on there. They did change the statute. You do not do that. We talked about the new legislation, but I know we talked about a lot. You don't do them at the county anymore. They go to BMV. They change what gets refunded or what credits they get, but they don't come to the county anymore. Those are no longer your responsibility.
Okay. Any other questions before I move on? There's just one other topic that I want to talk about for the last few minutes that I have. There were a few things on here about our excise reconciliation form. Due to time, I'm just going to kind of bypass that. This was just mostly about basic items on the form. One thing I want to talk about, though, is excise tax cutoff. Once I get there. And the main reason I just wanted to bring this up because starting this settlement, this is going to be something I'm going to start putting a little more attention to. I'm not putting attention to it per se to try to hold up settlement or even to stop settlement. It's just, I just want to kind of start doing some analysis on the cutoff balances. So you may start getting some questions from me about these cutoff balances that are being reported. And that's why they're kind of coming up this year. And kind of as I'm saying here in the slides, I will not reject or impact your review of the settlement at all. I just want to start doing some analysis to make sure your cutoff balance makes sense. So really what I'm going to be doing is two kind of analytical procedures where I do kind of a pro rata balance, where I compare a pro rata balance to the prior year balance, and when I compare the current year balance to the prior year balance. And I just kind of want to show you guys the analysis that I'll be doing, so when I ask you the questions, you kind of understand where these questions are coming from and why you're receiving it this year. So for the pro rata balance, kind of some background information I made up is that a county has a cutoff date of March 31st, and they submit their settlement for review on June 1st. So there's a 61-day window between their cutoff date and their settlement date. For the certified excise tax, there's $750,000, and the amount received after the cutoff date was $300,000. The total collection period of April 1st to September 30th is 183 days, and October 1st to March 30th is 182 days. So if I look at the kind of the test that I'm doing, I'm just looking at the total number of days between cutoff and submission, so the 62 to 183 days. So that's, for that current year, that's about 34% of the collection period. So the amount at the cutoff period was $300,000, and the amount of the certified amount was $750,000. So that's about a 40% difference. So you're saying about 40% of the collections have come in. Then or cut off the settlement, yeah, about 40%. So if you take the difference between the percentage of the year, 34%, less the cutoff settlement date, the 40%, there's about a 6% variance, which is, this is a made-up example, so it works out just fine. But what I'm just looking to see is, does this number make sense? I may find out as I do this for all the 92 counties that it doesn't make sense, and this is a bad test. But and then I'm also going to compare that negatives, that percentage to the prior year percentage. So I'm kind of looking at a couple years. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is kind of build a basis of multiple years to kind of try to get a expectation of how the cutoff period should compare to your actual amounts that are being distributed. The other way I'm going to look at the cutoff balance is a little bit simpler of a test, and sometimes I think simpler is always better. Sometimes I think with these kind of testings, when you try to throw in these assumptions and too much, it becomes more difficult to understand what you're looking at. I'm just going to simply take your current cutoff balance, compare it to your prior year cutoff balance, and see how it's fluctuating, how it's moving. To see, is this number holding relatively constant? Is it common to see a 20% increase, 20% decrease, from year to year, or is there really no relation from year to year? So the reason I just wanted to go through this relatively quickly is just because you may be getting some questions from me at settlement time. So just want to let you know that's where these settlement questions are coming from. But don't get nervous by thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want this to hold up my settlement, because this will not impact our actual review and pre-approval and final approval of your settlement. This is just us. We just want to make sure that when we look at these cutoff numbers, that all the funds are actually being distributed, and there's not some money that's kind of lagging behind, just going period to period to period and not being distributed. I don't know if that's a problem. Hopefully it's not. It's just something I kind of just want to check into and see if there's any potential problem. That's everything I had, and I am actually 5 minutes early. You're welcome. That's where the applause is.